Anybody give me a thumbs up? Okay, good deal.
Yes.
So as was mentioned earlier, this session is about thriving instead of just surviving during the transition to online advising. I picked that title not just because it rhymes, but it's a good mentality to have. We don't want to just survive when we deal with crises or chaos. We want to be able to thrive in those issues. So I decided to focus on that. And let's see, there we go. So quick overview of what we're going to discuss. I'm going to talk about the transition, meaning the transition at my particular institution in the department that I oversee. We'll talk about the advisor factor. So a lot of times when we transition to things, we think about students, but not necessarily about staff. And that's a significant piece that needs a lot of attention. I'll talk about a few tips and tricks that I would recommend based on my experiences. And then also based on my experiences, we'll talk about some of the observations that I've had and what those might imply for the future. Then I'll have a resources slide for some links because this presentation will be made available to you all, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So that's what we're looking at to cover for today. So I like to give context before I talk about anything. At Santa Fe College, we do have advisors in a centralized department, which is what I oversee, the Academic Advisement Center. This is really working with AA advisors. We also have advisors at our centers and also in departments, program advisors for our career and technical education. So they actually report through academic departments. So I'm not really covering that for today, mostly just the area that I had jurisdiction over and was able to coordinate. But to give you an idea of the staffing in my area, I have 11 full-time advising specialists, a coordinator who helps with oversight and also advises a small caseload. I have an advising support specialist who really handles our front desk, which is virtual now, but our front desk operations. And we also had 2 work study students who also helped with the front desk, but were working really project-based since we transitioned online. So as I mentioned, these are all AA advisors. So we oversee students who are assigned based on the AA advisement track. My team has on average just under 1,000 students per caseload per advisor. But we advise students via drop-in and also appointment. So we offer both of those options. Advisors rotate their schedule throughout the day to determine whether they're doing drop-in or appointments. And for our appointment technology, we use Grades First, which is one of the EAB products. Some of you might be familiar with Navigate, but students are able to schedule through their student accounts, and they can choose whether they want an in-person appointment, a phone appointment, or a Zoom appointment. So we actually had that option available before we ever made the transition to fully online services. And then another piece of context is at the time that we transitioned, it was about 2 weeks before summer and fall registration was open. So if you've been in the advising industry, you know that students start looking for you right before registration opens. So we did have students who were coming to see us. And then the president issued his announcement that we were transitioning to fully online operations starting on March 17th. So he sent an email out to the entire college about midday. And that afternoon, we found out we did not know when we were coming back, and we needed to be ready to start offering services in the morning. So that was what we were looking at in terms of the context. And so the transition, I know there's a lot of words on this slide, but I'm going to go through it, break it down. So essentially, there were 4 components that we were looking at for my department's transition. The first thing we tackled was updated messaging. And that started with putting a sign on the door before I walked out for the day, letting students know if they happened to be on campus, what was going on, if they hadn't read their email, what was going on. We updated our department website. So we had a banner right at the top that talked about how students could schedule an appointment or how they could access us for drop-in via Zoom. We had email templates, so every advisor had the same message in their auto reply, both internal and external emails to let both staff at the college who didn't know, but also students or prospective students know what we were doing. We had a voicemail message template that every advisor put on, saying we wanted same consistent messaging. And then each of the advisors also sent out a campaign to their caseload to let them know we had transitioned to online operations, what the expected date was at that time, to make sure everybody was on the same page. So that was the first part. The other part was we decided to put everything to Zoom. And so part of that, we already had students scheduled a couple weeks out to come see an advisor. So we went in and changed all of those formats to Zoom instead of in-person or phone. The in-person and phone options were removed out of Grades First, so students couldn't even see those options. We changed our department location from the physical locations to display virtual services to let them again know we're not going to be on campus. Look for us online. And for the appointments, advisors, because we'd already been offering that type of appointment option, advisors were meeting with these students in their personal Zoom rooms. And so we continue with that We already had that built into our scheduling system. So the second prong of this that was a little bit new is we decided to do a virtual advisement lobby. And so we did this using Zoom. I looked at all of the meeting configurations. So students were not going to be able to enter with video or with their microphone on to make sure there were no inappropriate images or things being said. Students would not be able to change their name, but we could. So if they came with an F-bomb for their name, we could change that immediately to make sure it was appropriate. There was a waiting room, which had messaging about this is drop-in, you see the first available advisor, here are hours of operation. That second piece was something a lot of areas missed. And so because it was virtual, students thought people would be available 24/7. We didn't have that issue because we made it very clear, this is what our hours were physically, this is what they are virtually, so that students could see that immediately. And so students, when they came to our drop-in, would get into our waiting room, and then our front desk person, our advising support specialist, would let them in one at a time. So when they entered into what you're sitting in now, a Zoom meeting room, there would be a PowerPoint on display which indicated, hey, welcome to our advisement virtual lobby. You're going to be matched up with the first available advisor. So they would see those instructions, and each of our advisors were in a breakout room in Zoom. So we're in the main room, they have breakout rooms that we could send students to. And we utilized Microsoft Teams. We had a department chat. So once a student came in, a note went out saying student, and the advisor would respond, me, I'm ready, I'll take one. And with that, students were then matched up and sent to the breakout room to meet with an advisor. So we were able to accommodate and completely transfer our regular operations into a virtual format during this transition in almost no time, because again, we were ready the next morning when our doors would have opened, they opened virtually. So that was our transition, but one key part of that was what I would call the advisor factor. And so when you're doing new things, training and resources are important. Because my staff had been offering Zoom appointments since October, the prior October, there was very little training that needed to be done. We did practice using breakout rooms very early when we were thinking about our place is going to be going remote. Is this something that's in our future? So we practiced that, but we had that on our agenda anyway. We were planning to roll out that feature during the summer. So it wasn't a foreign idea. The advisors weren't afraid to get into that or weren't afraid of the technology. And we'd also surveyed the team to make sure they had the appropriate technology resources in case we did end up going home. So every advisor I checked to make sure, do you have a webcam? Do you not have a webcam? We have one in the department. Let's get that to you. Do you have a laptop? Do you have internet, stable internet? And so for those who had some concerns, they were able to take computers home. Of course, we've been home a while, so some people had some computer issues since then and have been able to interface with IT to get replacements. But for the most part, from a technology standpoint, we were ready to go. The other key component here is constant communication, not just with the staff, but also with students. So for advisors, we had emails that sent out. Anytime we had updates, I was sending an email. We had weekly meetings, which is not new for us. I had weekly team meetings, but I also kept on my calendar the bi-weekly one-on-ones with my staff, because sometimes there are things that come up that they don't want to talk about in a group setting, but we can get to on a one-on-one basis. And that allowed me to fill out, how are you doing with this transition? What do you need from me? That didn't have to be a public conversation, but it kept the lines of communication open. And that's why I say groups and individually. But the other piece of that with students is it was not unusual for us to send out a messaging campaign. They'd seen that before. So for them, it was just regular business. All of our email templates, all of our auto replies, they'd seen those before. So for them, it didn't feel different other than we're just not physically coming to the office. The other thing that we worked out with the advisors is individualized projects. So when you do transitions before it really takes off, people have some dead time, or time that they can focus on doing other things. And the other thing is when you're fully remote, some of you may notice and be able to identify with, it seems like you do a lot more work. You have a lot less lulls that you would, if you were in the office. And so it was important to me to reach out to each of my teams to figure out what's something you could work on, whether that's related to your individual caseload. So some of them are working on communication timelines, what specific messaging for engineering students, and when should you send it and what might they need to know, which may be different from fine arts students. So some are doing those types of things. Some are working on department projects, updating outdated forms or updating the website, and some are working on larger projects related to advising at the institution or the college as a whole. So we're working on chatbot and getting that up on our website, but also We do an emergency aid grant. So we have some advisors who are helping with reviewing that. The next thing is professional development. So our HR department, as well as different professional associations such as AFC, have sent out a lot of information about professional development opportunities. And so this has been a good time for my staff to take care of that particular need and to continue to do that. So it wasn't just focus on the students and wait until I have something to do, but how can you continue your personal and professional growth while we're in this new platform? So that's something that got pushed out. And one thing we did at the institution level, because we do have advisors in a bunch of different areas, is I facilitated, along with a few other folks, a advising Zoom session where we all got together not too long after we transitioned to figure out what's working well, what's not working well, what technologies are you using, what concerns do you have, how can we fix those so that we're all on the same page. And just really, how are you doing? Like, it's stressful for students, but it's stressful for you too. And related to that, because I have a department and they're all in the same space, they're used to a little bit of a social interaction, being able to see somebody, being able to say hi. A lot of that was lost when you move to a virtual layout. And so one thing that I wanted to make sure that I did is I used some of our team meeting time for team building. So we played virtual charades. We have a staff member who's having a baby in a couple of weeks. So last Friday, we did a virtual baby shower. We send out, some of them are using gifts in our chat to lighten up the day. So we made sure that that social component was not lost in order to make sure that morale and mental ability and feelings of our staff are maintained. And then something that often gets missed in transitions is the reporting and assessment piece. So it actually, for us, we weren't doing much assessment before, but this created a perfect opportunity. And so we have a Qualtrics survey that each advisor gives to students at the end of their session. And so it's not just about who did you see, did you like them, but it's more so about, did you look at your degree audit? Do you know how to read that? Do you know what you should be taking next? Do you know how to register for classes? And then what did you think of the technology? Do you hate it? Was it easy? Was it not? And we were kind of floored with the feedback we got. I want to say 96% of students met all of our learning outcomes during their session. A lot of them left detailed. We had an open comment section at the end, and all of them said, oh, this advisor's the best one I've ever seen. And oh, this person's so nice. So that was good, not just for us seeing how we're impacting students, but also for the advisors to see their individual impact and for us to have a record of that. So now that we're moving towards phone appointments, I'm going to update our survey to get an idea of why do students choose phone over other formats, and are they still meeting the same learning outcomes? And then in terms of reporting, the advisors would send me initially on a daily basis counts of what they were doing or how many emails they were sending or the content of it to see what the field was with students. And then now we switched to a weekly basis to be able to continue to see where are the needs, how can we flex appropriately. So that's the big picture in terms of our transition, but a few tips that I would say, and these are just my ideas, but don't plan for the crisis, plan for the future. So there will always be another crisis. And what tends to happen sometimes in higher ed is that we plan for that particular crisis. The problem with that is the next crisis is going to look very different. And so if you plan for today's crisis, likely what you've created will not be useful in the next crisis. So my suggestion is to plan for the future. So everything that my department did was not specifically related to COVID. It was related to, we have a need to help students. We had a need to help students online. We didn't have really a format for that. So this let us expand it. We had introduced Zoom. We didn't have a lot of buy-in from students for that. So now we've exposed a ton of them to it and they see the benefit of it and like it better than phone for some. The next item I would say is do more than just learn the technology, try to break it. So sometimes we take on new technology and we learn the basic how-tos and then we think we're good. But one thing that got added to my job title when we moved online is IT or help desk. And so if I don't know the boundaries of the technology, I can't really help a staff member or a student navigate that. And so I really looked at what are the boundaries, what can you do, what can you not do, because that let me do a lot of things in advance to make sure we didn't have certain issues that other departments or other colleges may have seen with their technology. Next item here is both standardization and personalization are necessary. So in a crisis, people crave structure. They crave some sense of stability. And so that's really where it's important to have some sort of standardization. Here's what our policy is. Here's what our hours is. Here are what our services are. But you also have to leave an element for flexibility. So personalizing assignments for advisors, for students who have special needs, allowing for advisors to be able to call them, those types of things. Both of them are necessary when you're making any type of transition. Similarly, repetition and reassurance are your friend. So when you're in an environment like we're experiencing now, there's a constant flow of information. As an advisor, part of your job is to be able to convert that information, to be able to disseminate it effectively to students, which means you need to know it. And so with information changing by the moment, there was a lot of times where I needed to repeat a policy or a change to my staff to make sure that they were fully aware of it. So maybe I mentioned it in a meeting and followed it up with an email. That way nothing got lost. Likewise, you want to be able to reassure people. So because there's so much uncertainty, it's important for you to be able to tell them it's okay. You're not alone. We'll get through this. Look how well you've done. Not just for us, but also for students, because sometimes they're in a panic and they forget about all the things that they've done well. So it's good to reassure them and let them know, we'll figure it out. There are options available. This is not going to be the end of the world by any means. Last two items here, disruption breeds creativity, so capitalize on it. So in a crisis or in a times where you have very limited options, people get real creative. People reimagine things. The problem is typically we reimagine for the crisis. We don't reimagine our department. And so when you have people who are starting to think creatively, try to hone in on that and get them to think more broadly. So if this was not our situation, how could we take what you're thinking about and apply it to our office? Is this a policy or a practice that we could do once we return back to campus? So capitalize on that. And then dispel the idea of a return to normal. So initially people were like, I just can't wait till things get back to normal. Well, I hate to break it to you, but we're not going back to normal. This will be a new normal. And with good reason too, because there are probably things at your institution or in your department that have changed for the better. Was there a form at your institution that students had to go to 5 departments to get signed? That is now, oh my gosh, it's electronic. That is something that's beneficial that you want to continue. And so rather than focusing on what I lost that comfort, I lost that stability, I lost that normalcy, let's focus on what you can gain. Look at the benefits we've seen in our students, that type of thing. So with that, here's some observations and future implications. One thing that we've noticed in my department is students, before they would come to us with this sense of entitlement. You're going to do this for me right now. Now they're emailing with a sense of humility and with patience, saying, I know that you must be stressed out too. I am so sorry. Could you please help me? Oh, I understand. And so that's really refreshing to see, not just from students, but from staff too. Sometimes we send an email and we're just like, can you do this? And now we're like, I know you got crazy things going on. Get back to me when you can. And so that type of human nature that we're starting to see come out, I want us to continue to hone and develop. And that has a big place in advising. Likewise, increase self-sufficiency and self-advocacy. So a lot of times you would say to students, you don't read your email, you don't read anything. You just come and ask me to do it for you. Well, go figure. Now they can read their email. Now they read websites. Now they read alerts. Now they're checking the news. So why don't we use that? Why don't we teach them to continue to use those skills? And likewise for self-advocacy, a lot of times students would not ask for help when they needed it because they thought they were the only one. Now you're not the only one. Everybody's dealing with this crisis. So reach out and say something. So really capitalizing on that, letting students know, I am so proud that you asked me for some help. Here's how you can get to your resources. We're here to help you, is another thing that will benefit them in the long term. Recognition of the human factor. So we're now on video and a lot of us, you can see people's backgrounds. You can hear pets in the background. And so for students, oh my gosh, you got a puppy? Can I see your puppy? Can I see your cat? Oh my gosh, you can connect on that level. Or I can see the picture that you have behind you, or look at that view, or I didn't know X, Y, Z. And so being able to see that your advisor isn't just this stuffy person who's buttoned up in their office, but also a human. Likewise, for the advisor, getting to see what students are going through. Now that they're reaching out for help, oh my goodness, look at what you're dealing with. You had to go, you drove from Orlando to come pick up a computer to finish this class. Like the commitment level and that transparency is important. I've kind of already touched on increased efficiency or productivity, related to some of our practices, but also rethinking the service delivery model. So we've proven in a lot of positions, it can be done remotely. And that was something that was always said before, it can't be done remotely. Well, now that we know that it can be done remotely, do you just go back to campus or do you rethink how you offer services? So maybe you have an advisor who doesn't necessarily want to go back to campus, but how do you use that? Perhaps you decide we've never been able to offer late hours. So if you're going to stay home, you get to work the 6 to 10 shift and impact this whole new area of students who've never had access to our services before. Or maybe you work on a Saturday morning or a Sunday afternoon. That's a new type of service that we would have never really thought about or considered without the current situation. And the last item there is resiliency. So both staff and students have demonstrated we can handle a lot, probably a lot more than any of us ever realized. And so it's important to not ignore that, but to acknowledge it and to hone on it. So when you have a conversation with a student, you just handled a lot this semester. You are capable of doing this. Or even staff, when they put themselves in boxes or barriers in terms of what their skill set may be, well, you just did all of this in like less than 24 hours. I think you can handle this new challenge that's coming up. So really capitalizing on that and being able to use it. So this slide here, here's some resources. So Achieving the Dream actually created a Canvas course. And so they have a lot of different resources on various areas, including student services, faculty resources are in there, and a few other things. NACADA is specific to academic advising, and they have a long list of resources. They've had a lot of webinars recently, and so they have the slide decks, they have the recordings, there's some crowdsourced resources there. Frontier Set, there's a Google Doc where people have been putting information for students, faculty, and staff, online resources. For those who think about policy or government issues, the AAFCU has resources available. And then because I mentioned the social aspect with my team, I also gave you a link there to some virtual team building activities for remote teams. So I think now that brings us to Q&A. And I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody.
All right. Andrea, you speak really fast. You're awesome.
I know.
Eileen speaks really fast, and I sent her a private message. I said, wow, someone who talks faster than you do. That was a lot of information, great information. You know your stuff, so thank you. We were trying to go through and just to see if there were questions. I didn't really see. Okay, someone sent me one privately. The question is, how do departments or advising, how can it work when it comes to issues of trust among staff when working from home and remotely? This person says they feel it's an issue at their institution because things seem to have been slowing down. I think I verbalized that. Did you get it?
Yeah. So if the issue, two pieces, and I'm not sure which one they're digging with. If the issue is trust from like externals, thinking about are your advisors actually working, then one thing that you can do in terms of that assessment and reporting piece is gather your numbers. So, and you don't just report advising interactions. So something we didn't normally track were emails, because that wasn't something that necessarily needed our attention. We had enough students coming in. So I started tracking email numbers because a lot of students, instead of reaching out to an advisor face-to-face, started sending emails. The other thing is I mentioned those projects. So I've been able to demonstrate the productivity of my staff, even though you may not physically have a student. Look at this project they just did. How much time and efficiency can we have saved later on based on what they've been doing? So it's really about thinking about how's your staff spending their time. And if you do have some people that from internally you have a concern with in terms of whether they're being productive or whether they're just kind of, playing around, then you structure their time. So you give them more projects. You say, I need a deliverable by XYZ date, and you hold them accountable in that way that may be lacking now that you're not face-to-face in the office.
Right. Someone asked, how large are your caseloads?
So my team, each of them have just under 1,000 students.
Okay. Other questions?
I see Mia's asking for the survey. If you send me an email, and I can type my email in the chat, or it might be available with any of the resources, but I can send you a copy so you have a look at it.
Okay, thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome.
How many advisors do you have?
I have 11 full-time advisors and a coordinator with a caseload of about 200, 300 students.
I'm scrolling back up just to make sure I didn't miss anything.
My entire team's working remotely, Sylvia. Yep. And when we started, we had some appointments and then we moved to a drop-in only once registration opened because we weren't sure what the traffic was going to be like. And we've recently reopened our appointment availability. So we're looking to see like what the trends are. Some things we notice is students, because they don't have class in the morning, they're not getting up early. So we don't really see them until 11, 1 o'clock. So negotiating some of those things and just looking for trends was important. You're welcome.
Other questions? Okay. Well, Andrea has provided her contact information in the chat, her email. This recording will be on the AFC website along with Andrea's PowerPoint, where you will be able to get all that information. And I see Eileen has linked it here in our chat. Again, I want to thank Andrea. I want to thank Lynn. Lynn, is there anything else you would like to say before we end today?
Just thank you again, Andrea. This is a wonderful presentation. You guys are doing amazing things, and thank you so very much for sharing it with us. I think if we've learned anything through this pandemic is that we're all in this together, and being willing to share what we're doing, what's working and what's not working is so beneficial for all of us as employees and our students statewide. So thank you so very much. And if anybody that's out there, if your institution is doing anything innovative and you would like to do a presentation for the Administration Commission, just send me an email. You can go to the AFC website and our Administration Commission page, and all my contact information is on there. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, Lynn. Again, Andrea, thank you. And you all stay safe. Have a great afternoon. Thursday, we'll have another round of webinars, so please check out our AFC website. Bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe.